we are brought up with the idea that stories, right from the most profound idea of the creation, we are taught that stories begin with the idea of a man. Once upon a time there was a man. Once upon a time there was a boy. And that in these stories that we've all been brought up on, whether they're creation stories, they tend to put women in as the extra characters, as the assistants, as the character who will support the boy or the man achieve their destiny. And it's extremely hard in novels, in music, in choreography, in dancing, to have the primary creative idea about the essence of humanity being a story told by a woman, made by a woman, or about a woman. Now, when I realized that even in my own industry, that the essence of creativity was perceived to be something that could only really belong to a man, then I knew that I had to make a festival that challenged the idea of how men and women perceive each other, and indeed how women perceive themselves. Because if you are brought up with the idea of thousands of years where you are an assistant to creativity, but not actually centrally able to tell humanity's story, then unless you challenge that and the idea of art, then you will never make a change in society. Because art is the way that humans tell each other stories. And this was one of the things that was really interesting. 3 months ago, I went to Somaliland to do a wow in Somaliland. And I went to the caves, the LG's caves, which are created probably about 5,000 years ago. Beautiful paintings on the walls of these caves. And the very essence of how we know that humans love art, because they've made art not as a luxury, they've made art from the very beginning of their essence. And we looked at these caves and we looked at these art, and I said to the group of people who went with me, who largely were men, and to the man who looks after the caves, I said, the women painted wonderful pictures here, didn't they? And the man was very shocked. He said, well, it wasn't women who painted these pictures. And I said, how do you know? And he said, well, it couldn't have been women. So I said, how do you know? And he said, women don't do these things. I said, they do. We know they do. He said, well, no, they don't really. And although that sounds funny, I wonder how many of you, when you think about cave paintings, just assume that they will be painted by men, and that the women are somehow, roasting some meat, or just suckling the child in the corner. So I feel as if it's very important to get to the very root of our belief systems about men and women and inequality. And for that reason, I began to realize, coming back to men, that if what women were asking for was equality, we had to somehow ask men to start thinking what would equality look like for a man. Not what would women's liberation look like men waiting for women to be liberated, but what would shared equality look like between a man and a woman? And is it something that men could actively desire, not just passively approve of, or put up with, or resist, but is there something in a man that would actually like a world of equality? Because men do talk about the desire for racial equality, and men do talk about the idea for equality of sexual preference. But it's really hard to get men to talk about gender equality as something which they want for themselves, as opposed to something which they're prepared to give to a woman. So that was the reason for starting BAM, which is that I wanted men to feel that they had a platform to talk about the problematic nature of always having to be the superior being. by theological commitment, a kind of the idea that men had to be superior. But what a burden this would be in a world of the 21st century. And did men need a different way of loving themselves, a different way of thinking about themselves? And was that coming out of the feminist movement, or was it independent of that altogether? So, I know what it's like to live inside patriarchy, because there is no other world that's ever existed for me. And John, I don't suppose you have any direct experience of living inside a matriarchy, because no society has ever existed that we know of that is permanently in that state. But you have lived through a long period in your life of a changing relationship between the sexes.
I've lived in an even bigger patriarchy than you have. I was one of 3 brothers. There were no sisters. And when I was 8, my father revealed to us that my mother didn't have any hair. Now this was a very shocking revelation. Hair in a woman is a very, very important thing, as any woman would accept. And the idea that I'd grown up thinking that what I saw was my mother with hair was not the case made me question whether she was even my mother. I mean, it was such a fundamental suddenly to be revealed, because she had never revealed to us, we'd never seen her bald or anything like that. She suffered from alopecia totalis, which some kind of a shocking event traumatized her. All her hair fell out. She was sitting a music exam for the Royal College of Music at the age of 13. But what was terrible about this was, after my mother heard my father telling us this, she said, "Your father was an absolute saint ever to marry me." I thought, my God, I mean, the truth is, he was jolly lucky you ever agreed to marry him. But of course, therefore, I grew up in this circumstance in which my mother was very oppressed, and very oppressed by not having any hair. Nowadays, it's less of a scourge, because the wigs are so good, and all the rest of it. And anyway, some women go bald, so why not? But in those days, it was an absolutely terrible thing. So that was the start. And of course, in theory, I'm absolutely foursquare with Jude. I want to see equality of gender and equality of the sexes. But then, when I really think about it, it's rather frightening, because we've got it all our own way. I mean, we've had a very good innings as men, and the thought that women want some of that, equal pay, would that my pay have to go down? What sacrifices am I going to have to make to accommodate these equal women? And I mean, I think that that's a fairly common male response. If I think of my workplace, I'm a journalist, and I've worked in a newsroom all my working life. And if I cast my mind back to when I began 30 or 40 years ago, there were women in the newsroom, but they occupied relatively low positions in the newsroom. And worse than that, they were the objects of sexual interest, for one thing. They were exploited. They wouldn't want to get on. There was a degree of compromise involved in that. This was seen to me to be a horrible regime. Today, there are women in the management of my organization. We've had a woman editor, we have a deputy woman editor now, and the thing has been much more feminized. But where nothing has changed is in trying, on the news you require experts. An expert on Bangladesh, an expert on climate change, or an expert on the economy. You ring up a woman, and she will say, you will say, I want to do something on climate change and the way it affects Bangladesh. And the woman environmentalist will say, yes, I have written about that, and I know a lot about it, but actually my particular interest is the effect of climate change on small Pacific islands. That's really where my expertise. I don't think I'll come. No, I won't talk tonight, I'm sorry. And anyway, I've got the children to put to bed. So then you ask the man, and he says, yes, I have written about climate change in Bangladesh, but my real expertise is Pacific Islands. And what time do you want me to come in? Because men are prepared to bullshit. I mean, that is, I'm sorry to have to use that word, but it's a fact. Women, if they have any interest in bullshitting, they're not prepared to do it at the sacrifice of going out to give the children tea. And to what extent can they depend on me to go home and make the tea. I don't have any necessary inclination suddenly to go home and make the tea, but they have absolutely got to, because if they don't, no one will. And this seems to me the fundamental inequality. Can I adjust my life to accommodate this new world in which there is equality, and to which really indifferent men get to really good jobs that very brilliant women are not getting? And as a relatively indifferent man myself, I feel very threatened.
Yeah, false humility won't help, John. But I think this is a very interesting territory. The admission, because I mean, you know, John is very supportive of equality, but the fear that equality for women takes away from a man some idea of their place in the world. How do you think that that can be solved? Because we've been in discussion about women's equality for, well, obviously, I think forever, probably. I don't think it's a new topic, but urgently in discussion about it with regard to voting rights, with regard to economic rights, with regard to domestic rights, with regard to violence, and so on. We've been urgently discussing this for 100 years, and it's been speeding up.
Can we have the lights up? Because I'm worried quite a few men have been leaving the room. No, I'm serious. Even while we've been speaking, I've seen about 20 men disappear. I want to see the audience, as bright as you can give the audience, because we want to involve them as well. Because I mean, this is a problem we've all got to try and fix.
Why do you think that men who are in positions of looking at justice, as looking at lawmaking, at looking at the economic power bases, why are men not picking up the baton and running with this as something that is better for the world? Why are we still talking about it as women's issues belonging to women?
Well, one of the problems is that the power structures, and I don't know about Bangladesh, and I hope you'll sort of fill us in, because I mean, heavens, you've got a woman prime minister. The trouble is that women prime ministers don't have a very good track record. If we look sort of globally.
Well, no, prime ministers don't have a good track record. Let's put it that way. Prime ministers don't have a good track record, but if they're women, they are unfairly.
You don't want to hear the truth here. We had Mrs. Thatcher, we had Indira Gandhi, we had Mrs. Sorry?
Merkel.
We've got Merkel, yeah.
We've got Merkel. Merkel, I want to think is a new breed. After all, she has demonstrated wonderful compassion for the refugees, much against the will of her very male finance minister.
But I mean, every time a woman is in a senior position, she's singled out, isn't she, and scrutinised, so that if she isn't perfect, she's double downed, because she hasn't proved to be a good prime minister like most prime ministers, but she's a woman as well. And that's always a tremendously difficult thing to get over, because women, we know we're not born better than men. Nobody's saying that. Just equal.
Well,
and so they're not going to be they can't be equal and also automatically better.
Well, there's a problem here too. In a world which is so dependent on manufacturing military equipment and the rest of it, men have led us to many wars. Very few women have led us. Boadicea in British history, who I think lived in about BC something. Mrs. Thatcher had a war in the Falklands, but I suppose she didn't start it. But nevertheless, well, she did start it actually, because the Argentinian city was theirs, occupied it, and then there was a war.
But you're not really answering me the question.
No, I'm trying not to.
Which is, if men hold most of the levers of power, which we agree that they do, and it's not a criticism of any individual men, it's just the way that patriarchy has formed, at what point can men with the power say, right, we're going to make the world better by actively working towards gender equality? Not just waiting for it to happen.
The problem is you are depending on a biological situation in which the man almost invariably has grown up in a situation in which the woman has been looking after the man, the woman has been looking after the family, and the man feels that that's a pretty good way of life. And the man has a pretty good way of life. I'm just trying to think of a male judge of 62, let's say. I mean, average age of judges in many countries is sort of somewhere between 50 and 65. And they've lived a whole life in which basically they have not lived a condition of equality. Suddenly to start listening to a case and saying, yeah, they're bound to apply their own experience, and their own experience is prejudiced against women. I mean, it's prejudiced in favour of a certain order. And therefore, I don't think the change is going to come from men alone. It's going to have to come from men and women, men and women teaming up together to change this situation. One of the problems with women's lib in the West, women's liberation in the West, is that although there were men, and there are men who very strongly support it, in essence it is women trying to change the world, and men feel very threatened by that.
They feel threatened because they don't know what the world will look like.
Exactly. What will the world look like, for goodness sake? That is a worry, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is.
I mean, for one thing, if there's no war, there's no manufacturing of weapons. If there's no manufacturing of weapons, there's no way of making any money. You know, and financial services are no better. Although more women are involved in financial services than one would like. But financial money making on the markets is fictitious business, which has no product except profit for the pocket of the individual.
So do you actually really believe that if women had equality, that the methodology of ruling the world would fundamentally change? Do you actually really believe that?
I think it would have to. I think that if a woman has given birth to a baby, their inclination to kill the baby is not very strong. The man seems to be able to kill babies without, quite so much reservation. The baby becomes a person. You go to war and kill the person. I mean, I think about the Iraq War because we're all scarred by the Iraq War. I mean, the Iraq War in our time, I think most of us thought we couldn't have a war like that again. A completely ridiculous war hatched by men, two particular men, Blair and Bush, who wanted to dispose of another man. Blair, it's very interesting, was briefed by 4 academics before the Iraq War, who spent 90 minutes with him about 2 days before war was declared. And in those 90 minutes, they spelt out why war would be a disaster for Iraq. And Blair looked very absent-minded during the session. This is from an account of one of the 4 people there who I know. He looked very kind of unengaged. But at the end of it all, he said, I hear what you say, but you do agree he's a very bad man. Well, a very bad man is not enough of a reason to go to war. I mean, it's enough of a reason for a stupid man to go to war because in some way he seems to think that he can resolve the issue of his badness by killing a lot of other people in order to get rid of it. That is not a very intelligent way of going forward. But I think the Iraq War in many ways symbolizes and actually manifests the stupidity of men when it comes to war.
Well, it may or may not be true that if we had an equal society, war would be less tempting. That may or may not be true. I mean, it didn't stop Elizabeth I getting rid of Mary Queen of Scots.
The trouble is we don't know.
No, we don't know. Here's the question. Why does equality for women have to mean that the world would be like a better place in some kinds of other ways? Why can't it just be for fundamental justice?
Well,
why can't it just be because equality is a good thing, without what might come about as a result?
I keep coming back to the practicalities. The problem is we have not had enough women in power, and I don't mean as one person, but as a group of people. So, for example, in Britain that has given quite a lot of a legacy of good and bad. Possibly bad and good, I don't know. I don't live in Bangladesh, so I can't work out what you feel about Britain, really, except that you've tolerated having us here, which is fun.
So far.
But seriously, if you take Britain as an example, we had the emancipation of women, that's what it was called, in 1918. That is, very nearly 100 years ago. Sorry, more than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Hang on, it was 107 years ago. 107 years ago, women got the vote, and women were allowed to become MPs in 1925, right? Since that time, we have had 372 women that have ever been a member of Parliament. That is in a Parliament that has 650 people in it. So we've not even filled half a Parliament in nearly 100 years. That does not illustrate women in power. There are women in the House of Commons, and you can say, oh gosh, there are 500 men in here and 150 women. That's not women in power. In fact, it's women not in power. And therefore, we have to try to find a society where we've actually had a lot of women in power. In Scandinavia, we've had a lot of women in power, and Scandinavia generally, as was referred to in an earlier session, has a rather good record on these things. But we don't have a widespread example of women in power and what effect it has on society. In Scandinavia, I would argue, you have a better health system, a better educational system, less expenditure on defence, more communal activity between countries. So there is some anecdotal evidence that women in power leads to a rather better deal.
And does that sound like a society you would like to live in?
I'd love to live in it, yeah, absolutely. I would love to live in a country which had not declared war.
Right. So, in that respect, then, if anecdotally and based on hunch, you thought that giving women power in a different way, in all circumstances, would promote a better society and one that you would like to live in.
You're trying to trick me. I'm just.
I'm not. I'm actually no. I'm curious.
I'm worried. I'm worried about me and my job and my.
I know you are.
You know, I don't want to fight.
And this is the interesting
on
thing.
the one hand, yes, I want to see women in power. I want to see a reduction of war, a growth of education, a growth of health, a growth of humanity and communal activity and everything. But I don't want to lose my job.
Well. Yes, but change has to happen, John. You know, everything. Everything has to move forward, and the.
Well, wait till I retire.
Can I just talk about something else, which is?
Can we just? I think we should get.
All right, just one more minute though, because you know we know what we think we know what equality could look like for women. At the moment, I don't know what it's like in Bangladesh, but at the moment, the highest cause of death in the UK for men under 40 is suicide. Depression and mental health for men under 40 in the UK and across many parts of the global south, north, are really high, very, very high. And the explanation that is being given about this is actually the pressure that men put on themselves or is put onto men to succeed, not to share their burdens, not to disclose their emotions, basically to be a man, to man up. And that seems to be having a huge effect on their mental and physical health. How could men support each other to be less prone to feeling that being a man is one kind of way of acting?
Well, I feel very conflicted because, in fact, I don't like spending a lot of time with men. I like spending time with women. I mean, most of my best friends are women. I don't mean it sexually. I mean that I have better quality friendships with women.
Why?
I don't like football.
That's the most reductive thing you could say. I don't like football. End of story. Is that all that men do?
There's a lot of it, I can tell you. Well, football and heavy drink in the West, anyway. I mean, hopefully in Bangladesh you'll spare that, but football and heavy drink is very hard work. Very, very hard work.
Mm-hmm. So, do you also feel that with women you can...
What men do when they get together is they don't really want to talk about this sort of stuff. And the best way to avoid it is actually, either to get to drink or get stoned, certainly in a Western society.
Or joke, banter is a big thing.
Banter, yeah, but serious, thoughtful, philosophical, interesting things which affect the family, affect the home, affect the community, tend not to be the stuff of conversation between men. Football, great, fabulous escape to talk, about, a particular footballer or whatever. And it's getting worse. I mean, rugby, they've just had a Rugby Football World Cup. And so we've got another sport that's beginning to, infect the conversation.
But I think that BAM as a festival, thousands of men are turning up because they do want to talk. They just need permission and space.
That is true, and you do get really interesting, good talk, and that we do have. But it's a bit of a specialist zone. You go in there, and everybody in there, all the men in there do, in fact, want to talk about what we're talking about now. But that's because there's been a sort of, an opportunity to do it.
Yeah,
but you would shrink away from doing it anywhere else.
No, we've said it's allowed. Yeah. Right, let's take some comments from the audience. There's a woman there with her hand up. There. We've got a microphone.
Microphone coming.
And then there's a
over that
woman
side.
there, and I want to make sure that some men say something, right? Don't just think you're going to, yes?
Microphone going up there. Have you got a microphone?
All right, we'll take this one first and then the lady at the back, yes?
You talked a lot about war. I spent 8 years reporting out of Afghanistan, and one of the first things all my friends would talk about when I came back was, oh, how much weight you've put on and how much weight you've lost. I bet no male war correspondent ever had to answer that question. But I have a question for you.
What they say to us is, you were rather heroic.
I have a question for you. You talked about how wars are begun by men. But just as a person who's reported from war zones, how about the way wars are reported? That is so masculine, militarized strategy, and there's so much more to a place which is in conflict, and large parts of our world are in conflict. Isn't it time to rethink how they're reported?
I agree, and I do think, the problem, of course, is that you find yourself talking to the officers and to the soldiers, and too many of them are men. There are more women around in the armies now, but very, very few generals. Very, very few. But it's true that there's a generally male reporting of wars. Now, there are some great exceptions, like Martha Gellhorn, but she unfortunately is dead at the age of 88 or something. But generally speaking, the number of women out in the field, is wonderful that you worked in it. Is not, but it's better than it was.
But it's always as well. It's not just the people who you're talking to, is it? It's the way that it's the subject matter of war. What the bombings were about, what the strategies at the moment. Actually, most of the experience of war is women and children renegotiating on a daily basis how life is led. And not as passive victims, but as active community builders over and over and over again. And I think that's what you mean, isn't it? That people are not understanding the civil impact which is felt by women. And or women are always placed and just being talked about women and children as a kind of bunch of victims.
Can I just say that more women were dying in Afghanistan from maternal mortality than the total number of people from conflict in any given year while I was there?
It's very interesting because there's a big debate in Britain right now, this very day, about the fact that in a particularly gruesome, terrible, familial, criminal moment when a stepbrother killed his sister, or the other way around. But anyway, there was a terrible murder within the family.
Her, yeah.
The judge cried when he read the sentence out. He had suffered so much grief in enduring this trial and listening to the facts, and it was fought over weeks and weeks. It was very, very disputed. And actually the BBC reporter cried as well in reporting it. Now, this caused a huge stir. A, of course, the fact that two men had cried, but B, should one ever cry when reporting the rest of it? And it brought up the whole question of emotion. And of course, the emotion of the male reporter in the war zone tends to be with the soldiers, and not as you said, with the families. And I'm thinking of what we are seeing in Europe at the moment, of this refugee crisis. There's a complete inability to represent what's going on as individual people who have loved, do love, have, and there is no sense in which the human integrity of the individuals in this mass of people. I mean, 1.5 million people moving out of Syria across Europe. We've had male politicians describing them as swarms, like bees. These are individuals, and I believe women see other women, other men, other children in a situation like that, and remember who and what they are. And I think childbirth is a defining difference between us.
But maybe that's, if women see these people as themselves, then maybe this issue of you worrying about your job, maybe you just have to move over and give more opportunities. I mean, I don't mean you, John, because you're just acting as a sort of foil here. But the way that news has been constructed as mainly fact. I think that's a big problem. Right, lady here.
Okay, John, I'm a hard-drinking former active former member of the military in America.
Really?
I run my own business, and I couldn't do what I do without, and I love football and rugby. So maybe you wouldn't want to be my friend, but I couldn't do what I do, run my business working 24/7 without domestic help. At the moment, I don't live in Hong Kong, so I can't afford domestic help. I can't even afford a secretary. So my form of domestic help comes in the form of my husband, who's now retired. But before he retired, he almost had a nervous breakdown because he was working 24/7. I saw my brother also through the recession nearly have a nervous breakdown because he almost lost his house, his job, trying to support his wife and 2 children, his wife who didn't work. And I mean, what I'm saying is that I feel that men put upon themselves this great burden of responsibility. My husband to take care of us and to help me run the business, by supporting us financially while we got through the hard times initially. My brother, through that traditional role. But what I'm saying is also, the last time I saw my husband, he had a laundry basket under his arm and, the clips, and I thought, oh my God, what is this picture? My very masculine man. Who speaks softly, but I think as a woman, I must change my idea of who my husband is, what his masculinity is. I mean, he is a very masculine man, but now he's in a very feminine role. I think we as women must allow men to change their own roles as well as, fight for our own recognition.
So men have got to stop feeling as if they are solely responsible for
Exactly.
providing for the family,
Yes.
and women have got to stop asking men to fulfill that role.
Exactly. I'm very happy to, have the role switch now that I'm.
What do you think about role switching?
Well, of course, there was the convenient word retired. That was possibly the most important word in the entire equation. I raise this as a dangerous concomitant to football and rugby, which I'm sorry about, because I want to be your friend. But I'm sure we'll find something to talk about, music or something. But seriously, he retired, and I'm sure I would feel in the same position that I would want to do that, because I'd like to fill some of those empty spaces in my life. And what better way than to make my woman happy and my children fulfilled?
But that's a wonderful thing to say. But as you say,
but
when they're retired.
That is very different from moving over. He didn't have to move over, did he? Because he was retired.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So unless we can get to a situation where, after all, the idea of having to hire some other people on less pay, basically, to do the household chores is another whole debate. So at the moment,
I think you wanted to add something.
no, she just nodded.
Even if my husband, I wish that we had been in a situation where I was earning enough money that my husband could have quit his job
Earlier.
early. I mean, really, it was a financial, obligation that we had.
But don't women have as much right to a career, John, as men do?
Yes,
and don't we both have as much right to children?
but I've got a huge question mark in my mind. I'm wondering what the Bangladesh experience is. I'm wondering whether anyone would give us a sense of how they feel in this society, or whether we're talking about something very Western and absurd.
There's a man here and there's a lady there.
I'm looking for a woman.
Well,
Sorry, I'll rephrase that.
yeah, don't. There's a woman.
Yeah. Well, every man in my family knows how to cook, and they're happy to do it for me and my mother whenever we're not feeling up for it. I mean, it's not even something we look at like it's feminine. It's something that it's a basic need. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, my brothers, they're younger, and they're okay by baking the parathas for us in the morning for breakfast, and it's not a big deal. But I wanted to add something on that business
But just
thing.
before you ask the question, would that be typical of a Bangladesh family? A lot of shaking heads.
Everybody else in the audience is saying no. They all want to come and live with you now.
This is probably a new wave thing. I'm not sure, because It's probably something that comes with education, that you don't have a power structure to look up to.
You're being heckled now. Look, I think you're...
See somebody in the front row.
Actually, I just want to say something about Pakistan. That I think that the husband of Kelly, who just spoke, was very generous, because in Pakistan, my experience has been that even after retirement, men are not prepared to do housework. They want to continue in the same way. They want to be looked after, other people to do their food. So retirement has nothing to do with it. And very quickly, I want to tell you a story. I was, a long time ago, I ordered my younger brother to do something. And there was an elderly aunt over there, and she said, no, you can't tell him what to do. I said, he's younger than me. She said, he's a boy. You can't tell him what to do.
Can we take the man over here, please? This one, over here. John, are you going to pop? There's a man over here first. John, come back.
I just want to say
I was being threatened up there.
I've lost my voice, but I have to say one word. It's called conditioning. You're brought up and you're conditioned in a certain environment.
Conditioning. Can I see this man? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting evening. I think the average man, or the common run-of-the-mill men in Bangladesh, they also like to talk about sport, just like football back in UK. Here it's cricket, and I think it would be a very uncool thing if I said that I didn't like cricket or I didn't follow cricket. And I also think that men here are not going to vent out their emotions or talk about philosophical things or elevated things that John was talking about. So I think there is men are, how shall I put it? Men need to have the strength to show that they also have weaknesses and they can be emotional. They have to have the courage to say that they are also weak in some ways. So that's the situation over here. And I also wonder how much it has to do with education and the cultural background you have and the kind of social strata you belong to, rather than gender, when it comes to being more sensitive to women or being concerned about other gender issues and wanting equality, things like that. It's
one of the interesting things that we've found in BAM, being a man, these conferences that we have to discuss these issues, is actually that more than anything it's about fathers. We've hardly really talked about fathers and how you bring up your own children. If you bring them up to be like us, then they will be like us, and there won't be any very great change. Incidentally, I'm very happy to talk about cricket as long as we talk about one-day cricket and not three-day cricket.
I think your point about the courage to be vulnerable, men having the courage to be vulnerable, is a very, very important point. And as John said, when we were meeting lots and lots of men to talk about forming the Being a Man Festival, over and over again, men talked about their relationship with their fathers. Well, actually, they talked about their lack of relationship with their fathers. They mainly talked about the fact that they never knew that their father loved them, or they thought they probably did, but he never told them, or he didn't see much of them, or he was not really present emotionally, or he wasn't present in their family anyway. It was so interesting. Again, it may be different in Bangladesh, but there's a sense that sons needed so much the love of a father, but never knew that they had it. And we heard that so often. And again, I mean, how common is it for the dad in Bangladesh to sort of feel that they can be really emotional with their sons and really loving to their sons? Is that an issue? It is in the West. Anybody?
Can I?
There's a man there, yeah? And who's got the microphone at the moment? Somebody's speaking.
There's a woman speaking.
Yeah?
I'll speak after he does.
Okay, do you want to speak to that? Yes?
Yes, I just want to make a point that I don't think a father's affection is necessarily demonstrated simply by being emotional with his children. I mean, it's demonstrated by care,
Yeah.
by providing security, by providing a sense of feeling. that whatever happens, he's there for you. I mean, you know, I think we shouldn't sort of make sweeping generalizations.
No, but you made a very important point. I think my father was there for him, and I hope I've been there for my daughters. And I think that's a really strong point. And I don't know whether that is something which has changed, maybe even globally, whether people feel closer to their children than they were to their fathers. There was
Yeah. Interestingly, I marked one thing when Jude said that she had a very supportive father, and that helped her in her growth. She didn't mention her mother, I'm sorry. But see, that is another factor. When the father supports, that really helps the children more, because the support of a mother is more tacit, we take for granted. And the support of the father is more recognized. I grew up in I don't have any brothers, so my father was like the only man I knew in the family, and he was very supportive, more supportive than my mother in fact, because my mother wanted, like, okay, the daughter has to get married quickly, you know, that's a societal pressure. But my father was more eager to, like, for instance, see to it that I have a career or I finish my education. And that's, he wanted the Bangladesh, point of view. Another thing, lots of women, they have to leave their careers when they have a child. Because even if we do have household helps, but now the family is not like the joint family system we used to have before, where the couple are the family units are smaller now. So a career, the woman's career has to take a backseat if they want to start a family, and that's one of the reasons maybe. In the future, we'll have lesser children, because more and more women are now having, or are at par in terms of education with the men.
Yes.
And the problem that we will maybe in a decade or so we'll see fewer children, and that will be a problem, because that's a problem that we'll be facing from now on.
I think this really takes us very close to the core of this thing, if there is going to be change. And that is the question of the law.
Yeah.
Now, maternity leave in Britain is guaranteed in law. Not enough of it, but there is some. And even paternity leave now is just beginning to be enshrined in law. It seems to me the only way you would ever get change would be for really genuinely, a period of maternity leave which really made a difference to the child, but the mother would have the guarantee of returning back to her job, not at the level that she left, but with the capacity to be taken up to where her
She would have been if she hadn't taken
had she
that
not
leave.
taken the maternity leave.
And
That
the
seems to be
child's
essential.
responsibility should shared by both the parents equally.
Yes.
I guess that's a change
the
of
problem, because-
mindset that is required.
And the other thing is that online, the capacity now for online working and for updating people with the way things have changed. I mean, the mother can read her way into what's happening with her job, even while she's on maternity leave. It would only be a short period of time per week that she would just keep tabs on what was happening, without ever having to go to the workplace, without ever having the stresses of the responsibility. This is so easily achieved.
Could be.
But until we evolve
But
the
of course,
idea,
the people making the law would be men.
yeah, but also, John, the assumption that the continued responsibility of childcare is essentially a woman's. You have to challenge that. We have to challenge that. I mean, I've got 2 children. I breastfed. I recognise the fact that biologically I'm going to have the child and that I'll produce the milk. But I also, after that point, think that joint parenting in a modern society, joint ability to discuss school, to drop kids off, to pick them up and take to the dentist. I mean, this is not women's business. This is parental business. And we're still talking language about what will make it better for women. No, what will make it better for women, actually, is if parenting is considered to be an equal task, in the way that jobs are an equal task. So we've just brought in paternal pay in the UK, and it's far more precarious and complicated because men are much more frightened of sort of taking time off for all the value systems that we've talked about, obviously, you know, losing their place. There's a woman there with the... Who's got the microphone? Yeah.
Oh, so I come from a different context. I'm Kenyan, but I grew up with a very supportive father, and I think I grew up thinking that was the norm. Up until I was much older, I realized that for many people, my background was considered strange. So I grew up in a family where my dad was 10 years older than my mom. He retired early, but he was, throughout the whole process, he was quite a hands-on, you know, involved in the house, involved in housework, raising the children, and so I grew up thinking that was normal until when I now grew up and started talking to friends, and everyone would say, oh, that's so strange. My father, we barely talked to him, his only role was to pay bills, he never showed us any affection and such things. So my question is, how, in the work you've been doing, how do you talk to women who this is their norm and they don't even, because we all agree, we grow up in patriarchy, whichever country you're in, you're likely in a patriarchy, just to different extents. But how do you even enlighten women? Because sometimes the comments I hear are from the women themselves. So I'll hear women say, of course, no, you have to be subservient. As a woman, women will tell me, you know, don't show you're smart because that will terrify men, or don't do this and do that because that scares men. And sometimes that's just you being you. You don't leave the house thinking, I want to, I don't know, empower, I want to take power from men, I want to overshadow men. You just live your life thinking, I want to do A, B, and C. But for many women, they instantly want to make themselves smaller. So how do you talk to such people? How do you empower such women who don't even know that they're disempowered?
Well, I think the woman on the front row who said, well, conditioning, thousands of years of being told that your appropriate role is to be quieter, nicer, smaller, assisting. I mean, if you're told that over thousands of years, it's extremely hard for a woman to come out of that moment and behave differently. And I agree completely that if a man, if you're someone who loves you, or your father, gives you the approval to do that, then somehow, you know, a gate gets opened for you. Yes, your mother may say that, but when men have power, if a man says go through the gate, not because you're bossy, not because you're being difficult, just because you're entitled to, that's a tremendous change that will happen to a child. But for most women, they're waiting for that approval, and society isn't giving it them. And so the only way that I find of talking to women, who often are the ones who are bringing in FGM, women are often the ones who are complicit in lots of things to do with keeping women in smaller spaces, is to make them think about whether or not their own lives have really been as fulfilled as they could have been. I mean, nobody wants to believe that their life was not everything it could be. But actually, for most women, past generations, they've led less of a life of their potential. They haven't realised their potential. So I think it's women being vulnerable enough to admit that actually their life has been held back often by society's ideas. And instead of passing that on to their daughters, are they prepared to let their daughters fulfill their potential? I think this is about education.
There's still a lot of hands up, so we should take the woman there and then the man on the end of the row there, and then the man down here. So should we try and take three?
Yeah, we've got the microphone in the middle.
It's interesting that you should bring up the point of education, because that's exactly what I wanted to say as well. I loved what you had to say about equality, and that it should be a world where we're not necessarily trying to be one superior over the other. I would take it one step further and say it's not just parenting, it's also in the education system. When I was growing up, I was one of 3 girls in a chemistry class that had 15 boys in it. So of course, I hesitated to ask a question. But if we were to have an education system, and I'm an educator and we continuously struggle with it, and I know we will continuously struggle with it, we have a system where it isn't just a question of what is being taught in school, in the classroom, but to send your girls out there, whether they're 5 years old, let them go out and play football. Who's to say that girls can't play football? Who's to say that boys can't go on swings? So it's very important to have like a double-headed kind of a challenge ahead of you. I read somewhere it's easier to raise a wholesome child than to mend a broken person or adult. And I think that's very important, not just as parents within an education system, to realize that we need to raise them equally within a classroom, outside the classroom, everywhere.
Very good point, very good point. There's some other people down here, microphone? Somebody here has got a microphone. Yeah. There's somebody here, and then we'll come to you. Yes?
Should I go?
Yes, you can share.
Thank you.
Hi.
John. I watched you almost every single other night in London.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's bad for the
I know.
I do too. He's gorgeous.
Anyway, keeping it real, my central question to journalism, media, why aren't the high priests of media still not allowing real voices to come out?
Well, I don't know whether it's not allowing or simply not being open to, which is a different thing. One is an active prevention of real voices, and the other is actually being so out of touch as to not even know what real voices are. But I don't think it's a conspiracy to keep it like this. They're just playing along with what is rather than exploring what could be.
I think also, I've had lots of experience of people telling me that people won't be interested. And what they mean is they aren't interested. But when you actually say, well, people will be interested, and you just do it anyway, and there's a big audience suddenly appears, then you'll go, oh, well, I can see your point now. So I don't know whether it's true here, but there's a huge rise in conversations about gender now. But when I first started to run the World Festival, I was told that we've done that. It was passé. Nobody was interested in feminism anymore. And that's clearly not the case. So, I think John's right. It isn't that people, well, with some exceptions, people aren't stopping conversations, but they're in powerful situations where they aren't interested. So they can't imagine anybody else would be. There's somebody with a microphone up there? Yeah.
The last time I wanted to ask a question, but I couldn't because the discussion wanted something about what happens in a Bangladeshi family. So I think what happened in my family was due to the fact that my mom got sick after some time and she couldn't cook anymore. So it does take a lot for a man to start cooking for the family in this or anywhere else. But I think if you get open to the fact that it's basic need, it doesn't really matter anymore. That's why I brought in the education part. But my real question was actually on a more entrepreneurial level, because I was CEO of a company that modified cars, and it's not something that a girl would do. And I just wanted to speak about the fact that most of my employees were men, because I think at one point women don't feel like it's their comfort zone to go into the men's section and work. So they would rather sit at home and be a journalist. I mean, not that it's a bad thing to do, or I'm not negating this fact. It's just something that you're conditioned to be like that. Be comfortable where you are and not take that one step more, or probably lean in, like Sandberg says. So how do you put women into a mentality that the comfort zone doesn't need to be the only thing that you work with?
Well, you have to make the idea of courage in a woman something that is admired. You have to make the word ambition something which is positive and not negative.
Right.
Women have to have words that suggest forward thrust, that don't make them feel that somehow they're being naughty. And that would change the notion of comfort zone. And similarly, men have to have words given to them that would be positive, that would make them change their comfort zones. And there's kind of some level of reversal about the notion of what's a good woman.
Of course. I mean, I grew up a tomboy with short crop hair, and that's very, very strange in this country because it's not something that you normally appreciate. You appreciate a woman wearing a sari, long hair with a bindi perhaps, and that's what femininity is promoted as a woman that you should be.
Well, I think it's remarked to this man here. I mean, I think being different for a man or a woman is a problem. But if we're going to make changes in society, people have got to be different in order for change to happen. Who's the man down here? Yes?
I wanted to go back to an earlier thing that you alluded to in your talk, and that is really about what kind of world we'll have once women do take over the reins of power. But I mean, my question to you really is that can one talk about that kind of scenario being progress without really talking about the socioeconomic context in which this change is happening? Because I would put to you that whether it's racism or whether it's sexism or whatever it is, whether it's gender or race or some other kind of oppression, that unless one has a system that deals with all oppressions in some manner, in a kind of connected way, you never really deal with a single oppression on its own. So the very notion of having a brand new world that will be led by women and that will solve all the problems, I think that's slightly romantic.
Well, I've certainly never said a brand new world led by women that will solve the world. I've said a world of equality. And that doesn't seem to be romantic.
I only saw women applauding then. It's interesting. I'm in no position to judge.
Well, no, because I think, John, you have suggested that, nobody, I have never said run by women. As soon as one talks about equality, somehow it gets turned into the idea that women are going to dominate. And this is where fear comes into the conversation. I mean, at the moment...
Yes, there are a lot of men who in the home think the women do dominate. No, I'm just saying that is something interesting. I mean, yes. Although they are, to some extent, oppressed, the man also has a sort of feeling, oh, you're always asking me to do this, that, and the other thing, and I'm in charge. There is a conflict.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think but I think that there's an essential problem if theologically men are told that they are actually the superior being, even if they don't really believe it, there's a little part of them, a little voice that goes, well, shouldn't I be? And I think that's a problem for men. And it causes a problem for women. Because when women see men feeling suddenly insecure about whether or not they're losing their power, women often rush in and go, no, don't worry, you're fine, really. And you put them back up on the pedestal again. I mean, one does it automatically to look after a man.
Look, there are all sorts of currents and movements in play which have never been there before. And the social network is one very, very powerful one. I mean, it is really possible to express yourself in new ways and make contact with many more people and influence many more people than it ever used to be. And I mean, this is not a terrifying prospect. I certainly didn't say we should have women in charge. I said we should be equality, and I think equality is what we should strive for. I really genuinely don't think intellectually there's any difference between us at all. The fundamental difference is that you can have babies and I can't. I mean, I can have some hand in it, but no performance in terms of actually producing a child. And I do think that is the huge thing that is different, which is why I think women are more compassionate, fundamentally, biologically, because the prejudice, the assault, whatever, on any human, I think is more grievous to a woman than it is to a man, because she has given birth to a human very often. Although in our society, as we've been saying in the West, and to some extent even here, childbearing is reducing.
Yeah, and I mean, there'll be women in the audience who don't have children, won't be having children, don't want children, can't have children. So, the kind of impact of always putting women and motherhood together is not very helpful often.
Sorry, I did that.
But that's not to undermine your basic point, which is that the kind of idea of nurturing is something that, again, whether it's conditioning and also biological, women have been zoned into the compassionate zone, and often, that's a place that we feel strongly about. Talking about internet, I want to ask you, John, something which, again, I think is quite grievous, and I'll come back to the audience in a second.
About a few minutes left.
Well, I want to talk about violence. So, on the internet, you will find very great violence against women, misogyny. You will also see in society tremendous domestic violence and systemic violence in war against women. What do you think that men can do to help men not be violent to women? What's men's role with regard to other men?
Take FGM. Although it's taken women to raise the issue, there is no question that men have been receptive to that. I mean, the idea that this appalling violation occurs to a woman and denudes her of a very key element of her life, her sex life and her relationships with men, for example, or even with each other. This is something which has happened in the world in which we live in which there is inequality. But the fact is, there is an awareness of FGM which is absolutely global, and there is a global war against it, even though it is not yet being won, that's true. But this is not something which men are blind to. And so, you know, I don't know really quite what the point I'm making is, but I think even now it is possible to raise absolutely core issues of women's rights and have men respect them. And I think men do respect, absolutely, the war on FGM, which is a heinous and terrible thing, which is practiced by men on women, or women under compulsion on women.
We've run out of time, I'm afraid. I wanted to say two things.
This guy here in the shirt there, he has had his hand up for about half an hour.
Oh, okay, all right, we'll take it. Okay.
Okay, my name is Promit. I'm an oral surgeon, but I consider myself to be a radical feminist. So I would like to start by giving one information that in Bangladesh we have some indigenous societies which has been matriarchal, and it has been there for years and ages. So, okay. So, my question would be that why do you have to? I mean, the point, like when you talk about men considering themselves to be superior than women, then there are religious scriptures which allow them to do so, which allow them to think so. So why do we have to find any excuse, no matter how relevant, no matter how germane, to avoid this religion question? You know, like why this taboo? Why can't we kind of attack those portions? Or how do you suggest people to tackle those questions of religion where scriptures directly allow people and men to think themselves to be superior? So the notion of superiority comes from there to great extent, rather than any other little things that you search and you have to like put forward just to tackle the question of religion, because that's apparently a taboo.
I think this is the one unspoken area really today that we needed to address. The other day, I was in the city of Bradford in northern England, which is a predominantly Muslim community, and I was with the Bradford Muslim Women's Council. I think 400 or 500 women in a room, and we were talking together, and they are trying to develop a women's mosque with great hostility and resentment from some of the local mullahs. But it's not unique to Islam. I mean, my father was a bishop in the Christian church, Anglican church, and for many, many, many years, of course, the Anglicans would not allow women to become priests. And this year, finally, they made a woman a bishop. And that's a huge breakthrough for the Church of England, which has lost so many people from its congregation anyway, that they kind of need women to keep anything going. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. It's only when times get desperate and church going has gone from 60% of the population down to kind of 3%, that they say, well, heavens, let's bring some women in and see what happens. Maybe it'll rescue the situation. But definitely the role of men in religion is a very, very key element to where we are today. Of course, the rise of secularism and West will to some extent address that, but it still creates a kind of framework in which there's some legitimacy in somehow believing that men are superior. They're the only people who can become mullahs. They're the only people who can become Catholic priests. They're the only people, you know, you can go on and on with it. It is a male hegemony, which is very gradually being eroded by secularism, not by introducing women into the priesthood in whatever faith we're discussing. And maybe if they did, they'd have a better future.
Okay, now, this chap who came on with this piece of paper said you have to finish. So, can I just say it's International Men's Day today? Yeah? And since we all love men, congratulations men, it's your day. And can I also say that, I mean, actually this was a conversation between John and I, but just the way the stakes are set, I think it's really admirable for a man to come and kind of defend and debate the issue, because it's a tough one, it's a difficult one. There are quite a lot of men who would be nervous of doing it, and John goes into, he's outside his comfort zone,
well,
always.
All I can say is, look, I travelled a long way, and I'm really thrilled to have listened to what I've listened to today, because I've learned much more from you than you could ever learn from me. Thank you very much for being a wonderful and lively audience. Thank you.
Yeah.